Welcome to the Hill Update. I'm your host, Dean Allison. We all know that the internet has been a game changer when it comes to communication all over the world. In 2021, it's difficult to imagine our lives without it. And that's why discussions around censorship are so sensitive. This week, the federal government is looking for ways to censor your free speech through an internet with the bill called C-10. Bill C-10 would amend the Broadcasting Act to allow the CRTC to regulate internet content. Yes, you heard that correctly. The federal government wants to regulate what you put online. Back in 2020, Canadian Heritage Minister Stephen Gubre wanted news outlets in Canada to be licensed. The government eventually backtracked on this. This time around, Bill C-10 intends to regulate social media, websites, blogs, TV, radio, and the press. There's even talk about imposing mandatory takedowns of content within 24 hours of reporting. Critics say that Bill C-10 will undermine democracy and erode free speech. Others have called Ottawa's move to regulate video posts on YouTube and social media an assault on free speech. University of Ottawa law professor Michael Geist has called the current federal government the most anti-internet government in Canadian history. He says that in a free and democratic society, we don't subject basic speech to regulation this way. Peter Menzies, a former commissioner of the CRTC, said this: granting a government agency authority over legal user-generated content, particularly when backed up by the government's musings about taking down websites, doesn't just infringe on free expression, but it constitutes a full-blown assault upon it, and through it, the foundations of democracy. Menzies went on to say that it's difficult to contemplate the levels of moral hubris, incompetence, or both that would lead people to believe such an infringement of rights is justifiable. Many Canadians believe strongly that freedom of speech and expression is a pillar of our democracy, and without it, the future of Canada may be at risk. The Conservative Party has come out against the government's latest internet censorship. In a statement earlier this week, Elaine Reyes, Conservative Shadow Minister for Heritage, said that the Conservative Party will continue to stand up for the freedoms of Canadians who post their content online and oppose C-10 at every stage of the legislative process. The second item of this week's Hill Update is the election of the Islamic Republic of Iran to a 4-year term to the UN Commission on the Status of Women. The Commission is tasked with promoting gender equality and the empowerment of women. Iran has some of the strictest laws and codes in the world restricting the rights of women. Married women cannot obtain passports or leave the country without permission from their husbands. Women who are not married are similarly under the control and supervision of their fathers. Women cannot go out in public uncovered due to mandatory hijab laws, and those who face jail time. Iran's record when it comes to women's rights, including the practice of jailing women's rights activists, is a stunningly terrible. A 2020 Amnesty International report stated that Iran, the authorities failed to criminalize domestic violence, marital rape, early and forced marriage, and other gender-based violence against women and girls, which remains widespread. Last month, Iran's UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights said egregious gender-based discrimination persists in law, practice, and social attitudes, disempowering women and girls for participating and contributing in society. A 2020 report in the UN General Assembly noted that human rights situation in Iran, as including torture and large-scale arbitrary detention, as well as persistent discrimination against women, girls, and minorities. According to an analyst by UN Watch, however, at least 4 EU and Western democracies voted to elect Iran to this position. The Association of Iranian Women in France said this in a statement, alongside support from their counterparts in Italy and Sweden. We consider the election of this extremely misogynistic regime of Iran, and as a result, it is an insult to Iranian women, the main victims of this regime during the last 4 decades. Garnet Jenis, the Conservative Member of Parliament and the Shadow Minister for Human Rights, said this: elevation of Iran obviously makes a mockery of the important work the Commission should be doing. Joining me on the show this week is Dr. Robert Fallis, who has a 34-year history as a practicing physician. He has specialized in family medicine, worked in emergency departments, urgent care medicine, medical clinic design, and teaching and medical teaching. He was, for more than 8 years, the medical expert for Cityline, the most popular daytime show in Canada. When we come back from break, we'll be meeting with Rob Fallis. Joining me on the show today is Dr. Robert Fallis, who is an author and been in the medical profession for over 30 years and has done a variety of things. Dr. Fallis, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Dean.
So, listen, I know that one of the things you guys did, you worked with addiction and drug addiction for a number of years. Talk to us a bit about what's going on with COVID. Talk to us about some of the clients you dealt with. I'm not sure people would appreciate the fact that this is a real struggle for a lot of people, and maybe the description of these people would not be what normal people would think that the description would be.
Yeah, I've been doing addiction medicine now for, almost 18 years, and the people that you see in addiction has changed. So when I first started, it was mainly heroin addicts and people very marginalized and rough living conditions, but it really transformed over the years, especially with the OxyContin problems and stuff that we ended up having. So now it's a real blend. So we've got everything from marginalized populations who live on the streets to grandparents to guys who work in industry to university students. It's all walks of life. It's really transformed over the last almost 20 years that I've been doing it. It's really shocking, actually.
So
certainly COVID. Go ahead.
No, I was actually my next question. So what's COVID done? Is this are you seeing an uptick in what's going on? I'm guessing people are struggling more. That's certainly what I've heard. What's been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. COVID has been very problematic for our people in addiction because of the social isolation, because of the worsening, increasing toxic drug supply. So because borders have been closed more so than ever before, there's a change in the supply of drugs. Sure, fentanyl's still coming in from China, fentanyl's coming in from Mexico, but they're blending it with things that you never thought of before because the supply of drugs has been hampered. Let's put it that way. So I have never, in 18 years of practicing medicine in addiction medicine, I have ever seen it this bad. Like we have weekly deaths of our patients right now, and sometimes we hear of 2 or 3 in a week. And unfortunately, it's all 25 to 49-year-olds. So it's people in kind of the middle ages of their lives. That and the social isolation has been brutal for our people. So as we socially isolate, people who have drug and alcohol problems isolate as well. And so often they don't have people who are there who can support them and help them if they run into difficulties. And that's exactly what we found over the last year specifically in the opiate addiction aspect. There's been about a 60% increase in overdose deaths because 3/4 of the people who are using are now using alone. So they don't have the Narcan, they don't have the person there next to them if they run into difficulties. There's no one there to help them. So that's exactly what we found with increase in overdose deaths over the course of this last year. It's been horrible, actually.
So my question would be, you talked about social isolation as being one of the greatest factors, but would it be anything else? I mean, it's probably a combination. Would it be loss of work, loss of income? Like what kind of things would cause the rapid increase? And I think you said it already, the lack of socialization and the loneliness is probably the greatest factor.
Yeah, it's so problematic. I think all of us have struggled a little bit with COVID over the last year because it causes more anxiety, it causes a bit more depression. People feel very fundamentally at risk. And so specifically, we've seen this for all people. We now see Canadians where probably 1/4 of them have anxiety, depression issues. The incidence of anxiety and depression, especially in young people, is probably in the 50 to 60% range. It's incredibly high. And so people tend to respond to stress and life difficulties in whatever manner that they determine will help them get through it. And so when we saw the 2008, 2009 financial banking crisis, we saw after that a huge uptick in drugs and alcohol use. And I think that after COVID is over, we're already seeing some of the downside now, but I think it's going to get profoundly worse.
Hold that thought, and we'll come back after break and finish that thought.
Okay.
Joining me on the show today, I've got Dr. Rob Fallis, a best-selling author and someone that's been in the medical business as a practitioner for over 30 years. Rob, before break, we were just talking about the effects of 2007 and 8, and that led to an increase in addictions. You were talking about when and if this thing is ever over, what that's going to do as well. Would you want to finish your thought there?
Yeah, I think that the other thing that really worries me moving forward. I mean, we're already seeing an increase in overdose deaths. We're seeing an increase in domestic violence. We're seeing an increase in divorces. We're seeing an increase in depression. We're seeing a profound increase in anxiety levels. All of this is related to, and alcohol use and drug use, all the things that people, are trying to get through this very difficult time right now. And part of that is going to be the economic fallout of this as well. I was just looking today about the number of people who've lost jobs, 2 million last month and 1 million in March. That's going to have profound effects for people over the next little while as people struggle to make ends meet. Financially, it's going to be more of a difficulty with regard to drug and alcohol use specifically, and other ways of coping that people are searching for.
So why don't we talk, because you mentioned mental health and anxiety. So why don't we just talk a bit about that as we, for the rest of this segment. You talk about everyone handles things a little bit differently. So obviously maybe for some it's alcohol, others it's hardcore drugs, maybe some it's opioids, and go from there. Talk to us about mental health and anxiety and some of these things, and what sort of can be done.
Well, it's the uncertainty of everything right now, right? So when you've got food insecurity at home, when you have financial insecurity at home, there's always a worry about how you're going to struggle, how you're going to feed your children. Are you going to have a job, tomorrow? Are you going to be shut down at the plant? Is there going to be a COVID outbreak? Like, all of this is profoundly anxiety provoking and out of people's control, which makes it more difficult. So humans being as they are, they try to find things that will help them cope. And for some people, that's watching Netflix. For some people, that's going for a run. Other people, they found that alcohol may help them cope. So everyone's a little bit different on how they learn to cope. But anxiety and depression has been, I don't think I've ever seen it in 34 years of practicing medicine. I've never seen it as bad as it is right now. And the effects, especially in the younger people. And also we're seeing it a lot more in the more marginalized populations as well. So specifically, people who are living at the more of the marginalized levels of income and have part-time jobs or have full-time jobs that are more insecure. They are the ones that are particularly struggling. And it's coincidentally also the ones that we're seeing have more of an increase in COVID and COVID problems related to their communities at the same time. So all of these things are problematic, and we need to continue moving forward and finding ways to help protect essential workers, keep people working, getting people back working, and finding healthier ways, if you will, of dealing with stress and anxiety.
Well, that's why don't we get just a little over a minute left, Rob? Why don't you talk about some of the things that maybe we can do to cope with some of these mental anxiety issues?
Well, I think that, I mean, I've never seen it so many options now. I think partly it's because of the governments have taken this seriously and now are taking mental health seriously. So there is money flowing in. There are online programs. There's telemedicine options for people. There's questionnaires. Family doctors are very aware of depression and anxiety situation. So all of those things are beneficial. And then finding ways of having a healthier, happier life, dealing with the people who are at home, sleeping more, trying to maintain a healthy diet, exercising. All of these things are so fundamentally important to humans that we need to maintain them, even though we're under a time where it's particularly problematic and stressful for all of us.
One of the things that you now are specializing in is men's health. And when we come back from break, let's talk a bit more about men's health specifically and some of the things that your new practice is looking at and trying to help men deal with that. When we come back from break,
Love to.
we're going to talk about men's health.
Great.
Joining me on the show today is Dr. Rob Fallis. Rob, before the break, we talked about the sort of what you're into. I mean, you've done a lot of practice over the years on a lot of fronts. You've done some emergency, you've done some teaching. We talked about some of the addictions and opioid stuff you're working with. You're now focusing more on men's health. So why is that? And why did you decide to move in that? And tell us what you're doing and what you perceive as some of the issues facing men in terms of their health.
Well, like I said, I've been practicing medicine for 34 years, and I've done everything from, emergency medicine. I've been in urgent care clinics. I've done family medicine for over a decade. I've taught medical residents and medical students. I've done addiction medicine, so I've seen the mental health side. But I've also, when I was doing family practice, I was doing vasectomies and sexual health for men, as well as, I lived through the introduction of the Viagras and Cialises, and that was a huge boon for men's health, sexually anyways. And so what I've been kind of drifting towards and been thinking about for years is I really find that a lot of men's men's health is really not investigated, not looked into, ignored. Now, men aren't great at looking after their own health.
We're the worst, right? We're the last.
Yeah,
we never want to call the doctor ever.
We're horrible at it. And there was a 2012 study that showed that 70% of men were more concerned about the health of their car than they were about their own health. And we all know guys like that, right? So there are people like that who never think of their own health until maybe their spouse says, you really need to go see the doctor. So men don't help themselves, but I think a lot of it is they can do a better job. We can do a better job helping men. And there's a reason, there has to be a reason why men die 4 or 5 years sooner than women for the same health problems. There has to be a reason why, 78% of suicide deaths are men. So we know that drug addiction and alcohol problems are much more, 2 to 3 times more prevalent in men than women. So there are some very specific men-related health issues that we really need to do a better job dealing with. Everything from, sexual health issues, physical health issues, and mental health issues. So the other thing I've seen over the years, and especially 18 years of doing addiction now, I've seen a lot of, they call OPIAD, which is opiate-induced androgen deficiency. So we know that people on chronic pain programs or on using opiates or using drugs such as fentanyls or OxyContins or heroin or Percocets, all of those things can lower testosterone in men. And I found specifically that as men age, we know that their testosterone diminishes by almost 1 to 2% per year over the age of 35. So what is always considered a natural aging in men is not a natural thing at all. It's the lowering of testosterone so that by the time you're in your 50s and 60s, the guy who falls asleep, after dinner, and he's grumpy and irritable and he can't sleep at night, and his low sex drive, and he's failing at work and he can't keep concentration. A lot of that stuff is related to low testosterone. And if we actually test for it and look for it, we can find it. And if we treat it, we can have a profound change, a profound influence in how men feel, and also in reducing some of the age-related changes that don't necessarily have to be obligatorily part of a man's life. So there are some new anti-aging strategies, supplements, testosterone's optimization for men that can have profound changes in how they live and how they love and how they function in life.
Well, listen, Rob.
That's what I'm working towards.
Well, Rob, thank you very much for joining us on the show today. This has been great.
Oh, thanks so much.
We heard today from Dr. Rob Fallis talking about men's health and addictions and depression. So guys out there, listen to your wives if they're talking to you about the fact that you may need to get checked out, and realize that during this time of COVID, people are hurting. And so it's so important that we be kind. That is all for this week on the Hill Update. I'm Dean Allison. Thank you for joining us once again.